How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 2. So in this video, we're going to be talking about comparison operators, Boolean logic and their keywords, and conditional statements. For comparison operators, there's two different types of comparison operators. There's Boolean operators, and then there's numeric operators as well. For the sake of this video, I'm only going to be covering the Boolean operators. If you do want me to cover the numeric operators, just let me know, but they're pretty self-explanatory. I'll still write them down. There's the greater than, less than, greater or equal, and then there's less or equal. These are very self-explanatory. Same with these two. These ones are very straightforward as well. This one's just checking whether it's equal to something. This one's checking whether it's not equal to something. Now that we have the comparison operators and we know what they are, let's move on to the Boolean logic and keywords. These ones are also pretty self-explanatory. This consists of 3 keywords, which is the and, or, not. The way that the and keyword works is that it's kind of similar to how the equals to works in comparison operators. So in comparison operators, the equals to operator checks whether or not the first value is the exact same as the second value. If I was to give you an example in an if statement, if I was to do if x is equal to false, it works left to right. So it's going to check if x is equal to false. Equals to pretty much is checking whether or not it's the exact same as false, then that's true. When you use equals, this is going to return either true or false. So these two comparison operators, the equal to and the not equal to is pretty much the exact same as equal to, however, it's the complete opposite. So equals to, if the condition here is true, so if x is equal to false, it's going to return back true. So if I were to use a ternary operator, you'd do x and we'll say equal to something, or false, or possibly no. Okay, so the way that the and keyword works is a little bit differently to the equals to comparison. The equals to operator checks whether the first value is exactly the same as the second value. And it works a little bit differently because it's checking whether or not x is a true like value. What I mean by true like value is that basically as long as it's equal to anything that isn't false or nil. If it is false or nil, it's not going to run this part of the code. However, it's going to go to the for keyword and it's going to return back what's being written here. If it is true like, then it's going to return this. If it's not true like, if it's false or if it's nil, if it's not equal to anything, then it's going to return false or nil. So if we were to run this, because it's equal to false, it is going to return back false or nil, as you can see. But if it was equal to anything else that is a true like value, like true is a true like value, obviously, but it can be equal to anything. It can be a reference to the base plate in the workspace and it's still equal to something. So it's checking whether or not it's a true like value, whether it's equal to anything other than false or nil. Now that we've covered ternary operators, Boolean logic, and comparison operators, all of these can be used in conditional statements. And conditional statements can be used in functions, which is what I covered in the previous episode. All of these tie in together. Conditional statements, the most common ones would be if statements and while loops. While loops, they still require a condition, but instead of just running it once like an if statement would, it would loop as long as that condition is true. So we would have if statements, while loops. There's also the repeat until. I'll cover if statements first because you use if statements in everything. You have to constantly check whether or not a condition is true or whether it's not true. They're very important for things like that. To run an if statement, we'll do if x is equal to true, then this is the condition. If x is equal to true, then it's going to run this block of code here. If it is equal to true, like it is right now, let's print x is equal to true. If we were to run this, it's going to say x is equal to true. But like I said before, equals is checking whether or not x is exactly the same as this boolean that's equal to true. If x wasn't a boolean, let's say we had it as a string, but in the string it would still had the same value as true, however it's just a different type now. If we were to run this, it's not going to print anything because x isn't equal to true anymore. This is the if statement. There is also the else if statement. Else if statements and else statements, they only work within the same scope of the if statement. So if you were to try and use else if outside the scope of an if statement, it's not going to work because it needs to be within that scope. So else if x is equal to true, we can then print saying x is equal to false instead. Else, let's say it's not equal to either of them. Let's go ahead and print saying x is not equal to either. So let's say if it was equal to false, if we were to run it, it's going to say x is equal to false. Now, if this was true, it's going to say true. But if we had it, let's say as nil, nil is not true nor false. So it's going to say that it's not equal to either. So that's if statements, else if, and else. Let's move on to while loops. So while loops are a little bit different. The way you would use it is you'd type while and then you'd type the condition. So we'll do while is equal to true. Instead of doing then, like you would in an if statement, you would type do. The do keyword is essentially used for loops, whether that's while loops, for loops. So while x is equal to true, we can go ahead and say x is equal to true. Whenever you're dealing with while loops, you want to add a wait. So obviously it's not going to work now, but if we were to change this to true, it's going to say x is equal to true, and it's going to print it indefinitely until either x is changed to false, and it's just going to keep printing every half a second, and it's just going to keep printing until x isn't equal to true anymore. And then we now have repeat loops. Essentially, you just say repeat, and then you want to type in what you want it to repeat. Say repeat a string until x is equal to false. So repeat the string until x is equal to false, and basically it's just going to essentially just print it. And I didn't add a wait, which is my mistake. This is what happens when you forget to add a wait to loop. It's essentially trying to print every fraction of a second. But as you can see there, I'm trying to stop it, but yeah, it printed it 5,000 times. Repeat wait, not just print very fast, but you just want to make sure you have wait there, otherwise your studio will crash. These all tie into the same topics that I covered in the last video, and that is functions. Let's just give an example. Let's say we had a car, right? And then we had the ignition, and the ignition's false. Okay, so the car hasn't been started yet. Let's say we have the keys. As keys equals true. In these situations, if statements are very important. If I was to write a function to start the car, we want to make sure if the ignition is turned off, we want to make sure we have the keys, because we can't turn the ignition on without the keys. So what we can do is we can declare an if statement saying if has keys, then. So in situations, even though we're not doing equals true, if we were to do if has keys, this is checking whether it's true like I just spoke about before. It checks whether or not it's equal to anything. But if you know for a fact that this is going to be a Boolean value, then you can do this, because if it's true, that is true like. If it's false, that's not true like. So it still works in this context. So if has key, then let's turn the ignition on. So we'll do ignition equals true. Let's just print car has been started. And then we'll add an else saying print you need the keys to start the car. So now, because we have the keys when we run this, it says car has been started. However, if has keys was false, it would say you need the keys to start the car. So that's just a very common example of how you would use this. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned something from this video. If you guys have any suggestions on future topics that you guys would like me to cover, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.